morning, but as you may have just heard, Kathy paints out in the winter fairly regularly. She has definitely painted in below zero. She loves plein air painting, and I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to her. I know many of you know her, and the museum certainly has been a good friend of Kathy's and vice versa, you know, for as long as I've been around and longer. So Kathy has been involved with this museum since its beginning in 1987. She was in the very first Western Visions, and she has continued to be involved with Western Visions ever since then. I've known her in the 32 years that I've been working at this museum. I met Kathy shortly after I started working on the town square, when we were still on the town square, and we became friends, and we are still friends. It's really nice to get to know Kathy over the years. Other things I want to just mention to you, she's originally from California, as some of you are. She came here first and was working as a surgical technician in Idaho. And I still think that maybe contributes to, she's the most organized, neat, clean oil painter I've ever met. And you'll see that when she lays out her palette. It's and the instruments are all laid out there. I think some of that probably has influenced how you lay out your tools as an artist. She came to Jackson from having done some surgical technician work in Idaho. She came to Jackson to pursue what had been pretty much a lifelong dream, to make it as an artist, doing her art. And she now has a long history of painting on location here and other places. Her first summer in Wyoming, she started painting outdoors with Greg McHuron, who some of you may remember, fabulous artist who also is in our permanent collection and was involved in Western Visions and has passed away now. But you would go out with Greg once a week, maybe more, to learn from him. And some of you know, he was a very good teacher, in addition to being a very good painter. So Kathy worked with him. She also had the opportunity to work with Conrad Schwering, who is another artist in our permanent collection who has passed on, as well as John Clymer. We have the John Clymer studio, and we have some of his work, which is fabulous, because when I started at the museum, he'd already passed away, but she has that connection as well. In addition to painting, Kathy has done a variety of other jobs, working as a cowgirl being one of the biggest, which you still do, right? Going on cattle drives in the spring and maybe in the fall too, I don't know. But she rides a horse, she does all of that work. She's also worked a variety of jobs, such as caretaker at a ranch and down in Melody Ranch, and she lives there still, but she was a caretaker down at Melody Ranch for many years. Plein air painting, let's talk a little bit about plein air painting, and then Kathy can show some of her equipment, and we'll talk more about plein air painting when we go into the Rungus Gallery. But plein air painting was pioneered by John Constable, the artist in Britain, around 1813. But it wasn't until about 1860 that plein air painting became fundamental to Impressionism. And when we go in the Rungus Gallery, we'll talk about his, how he started adopting some Impressionist techniques into his work. But he painted outdoors, particularly in his latter part of his career. But he was an early outdoor painter, even though he was trained as a studio artist when he was in Europe. In the 1870s, and I know some of you talk about this in your tours, is when oil paints in tubes became available. So of course that made a big difference. It made it much easier for plein air painters to take pre-mixed paint in tubes that looked much like toothpaste tubes to go out into the open air. Plein air meaning out in the open air. What else do I want to say? Previously, of course, you all know that before paint became available in tubes, it was laborious. It was grinding the minerals and the rocks and the different pigments, mixing them with oils. So powder mixed with linseed oil. It was, took time consuming and messy too. But I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to do a show and tell, but questions first.
Just, When I talk about the early painters, the people like Moran and Verstappen, when they went on tours and stuff like that or came west, they would sketch, and then they would take those sketches back to their studio. Now, early on, obviously, they didn't have oils to do all of those sketches, but even when we had all of the Moran sketches from Yellowstone.
True.
Is that considered plein air?
Yeah, I think it would be. Like the Thomas Moran watercolors that were part of that.
Right.
Thomas
So
Moran's
those are
Yellowstone.
earlier than what you were talking about.
True. I guess I made the shift. So people have been painting outdoors for much longer. I don't even know when that started, but much longer. Watercolors, around the time that Thomas Moran went to Yellowstone, ready-made sets were available in the 1800s with the dry pan watercolors, where you basically just bring water and a brush and you add water to the dry pans and mix them up outside. So those were commercially available for people who wanted to take it outside or inside.
Okay.
Yeah, but then Impressionism, there's a connection between plein air painting and Impressionism. Plein air painting was done before Impressionism came along, but Impressionist artists were strong proponents of plein air painting. So it
without the plein air, you would not have gotten Impressionism because you had to have that light.
I think that's probably true. Yeah.
And the time frame you can paint when you're out on location is limited because the sun moves, so your shadows change. If it's a sunny day. Not that you couldn't go out the next day to it, but it's a more immediate thing than laboriously doing something in the studio for a lot of people because the light changes.
Okay, thank you.
But Kathy, why don't you say anything else you would like to say about yourself, but also talk about why plein air painting for you was something you got interested in instead of, I mean, I know you do studio work too, but talk about you and plein air painting.
So what Jane was just talking about indoor versus outdoor painting. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an artist in 2nd grade and did a lot of paintings at the house or in art classes in high school from photographs, and they just looked flat and they weren't lively and they weren't very good. So then I became aware of the portable easel, plein air painting easel, and my mother bought me one, and I came out to Idaho and Wyoming with this easel that I knew how to get the legs out of it, but I didn't know what to put in it. And that's where Greg McHuron helped me. He said, here, get these colors, get those kind of brushes, and come out with me. So it was sort of from the ground up. But because I felt like I couldn't get a realistic image without seeing the real thing, is why I wanted to learn to paint outdoors. And over the years, my kit has evolved. There's some great, really compact easels, which I'll show you. This is what I carry on my back. It's close to 30 pounds. I don't ski with it on because I'm not that good of a skier, and wherever I go to paint is not groomed. It's usually along a river creek or a riverbank or something. I use the rawhide, big long old-fashioned rawhide snowshoes because they're steady, and then I have ski poles to keep me from falling over. But everything I need is in here, basically, and except for my coat and my gloves that I have on. So I'll show you that when we get outside. So every artist, there's a great example here of Rangius in a studio. I'll just show you. Here's the final painting, which is on his easel, and this is his study, and you can see they're so similar. This is the final painting in his studio, and that is one of his studies. And so the reason, and Rangius was a diehard outdoor painting painter. He used to go hunting, and then he'd string up the sheep and the elk, and there's photos of him in his book. That's the study, and that's the completed painting. And there's one or two out there in the Rangius room to show you.
Okay, so study right there,
yes,
and then completed painting right there. Okay.
And a formal photo of it.
So we have a whole wall of Rangius studies.
Yes.
And I know you'll probably talk about it when we're in the studio, so you can table my question, but it's just, a study, if it's so close to the completed product, fantastic. Is it about scale, or is it
It is pretty much
about
scale.
detail?
Pardon me?
The transition from study to completed.
Yes. And so, like for me, when I have a specific subject in mind for a large painting and a specific size, for instance, for a commission or a frame that I want to fill, I will size down proportionally. If it's kind of square, I have a square panel I paint on. And I'll do multiple studies. I have some here. This is, I study animals from life a lot. You can see it's certainly not finished. I didn't care about feet or shadows or anything. It's color study, more or less. This is another horse study. These are both my horses. And there's, I didn't even put an eye in that horse. It didn't matter. But this is one of my treasured paintings because it was what I wanted in a study. Color, some decent drawing. Here's one I did. There was a painting in Western Visions several years ago with 3 bear cubs in it. Yeah, people from North Carolina bought. They were so thrilled. And so there's a place over in Idaho where you can go see bears and the cubs. And I had drawings that I had done on location in my sketchbook. And then I went out down the Hoback to find a suitable habitat for little bears goofing off. And there was some downfall there. So I had my sketchbook here, and I was looking at the landscape. And this is pretty rough, and we're not really finished, but it was a very valuable step in my creating. The painting was, I think, 24, 30 or something like that. And this is a snow piece I did. There's a barn down in Rafter J. That's the old Brownie. The property that is now Rafter J was his ranch, and Wilson's owned this barn. So I painted that last winter. So if I want to do one of these in a square format, this is an 8 by 10. So I can triple the size of it and stay true. If I like what's going on in the study, and oftentimes I'll change something. But I have the basics of something I want to recreate bigger. And I do, in the summer, I do paint big outside, like 30 by 40s, but I have to go out multiple days in a row, so the weather has to be kind
the same location, same time of day.
Yeah. And I have a big, heavy easel that one of my mentors, Skip Whitcomb, gave me, and it can fold up, so I can haul it around in the pickup. But I have to kind of be a gorilla. So anyway, my journey was because I didn't feel like my paintings from photos were realistic. And there's so much more that you see when you're outside as far as color. And a large part of the outdoor painter's job is to edit out a lot of stuff. You want to pick a subject and edit and leave out the things that are not pertinent to bringing attention to your center of interest. And when you're out in nature, this was really busy back here with a bunch of trees and different kind of trees, and I didn't need that. It's not about the trees, it's about the cubs. So, and Greg really helped me with this, and just my other mentors, it's like, you just have to leave all that stuff out. And so, and the more I paint, the more I try really hard to say more with less, which is, I don't want to paint every little top of every little piece of grass. I want to give you the impression of grass, and that's where the word impressionism came. And part of the reason we were talking about that earlier is it's impressionable because you have to paint so fast outside. Either the storm's coming, the light's changing, or you're freezing to death, or you're too hot, whatever, or you have an appointment with the dentist or something.
And that leads to the bigger brush strokes, the noticeable brush strokes, instead of think of Rungus's studio painting of the pronghorn that's in the Rungus Gallery with the fine details, and then think of his later work, which was bigger brush strokes, big areas of color.
Yeah, he was, I'm not sure how old he was when he came to America, I think in his 30s.
25? I think he was 25.
And then he was, of course he was extremely well trained. Everybody that went to art school in Europe still is, in Russia too, but then you can see the progression because it's hung chronologically, from his early works and then to the later works, and then they have all those great studies that Bill Kerr collected for years.
So this is sort of a crazy question, but would you ever paint plein air and have a finished painting in your mind and then redo it in the studio and create a finer level of brush stroke or detail or whatever?
Yes.
Do you paint, edit, and then retell the story?
Yeah.
I'm a wordsmith, so you have to excuse my choice.
No, that's a good question.
That's a great
And is it still called a plein air painting?
Well, yeah, I would say so, especially if it was started that outside. So I might take out things and I might add things, depending on, and it takes time for me to decide when a painting's really how I wanted it to be in my mind's eye to start with, because they often don't meet. So I'll do a painting, especially the big ones, and then I set them aside or hang them in my studio and look at them for sometimes months or a couple of years. Sometimes. The older I get, the more I want to look at them and decide what it doesn't need or what I could add that would. That's just the way I work. I can't speak for everyone. But because I had such great mentors, Hollis Williford, Skip Whitcomb, Greg McKeon, Connie let me come watch him paint on location several times, and Ned Jacob is the rastiest one, but he's a fantastic horse painter, so I did that. I hosted multiple horse painting workshops for him here. And every time my money gets short and I think, what am I doing this? I'm never going to make any money, which happens occasionally when you're a freelance artist. You don't have a steady income typically. I always remember how giving they were of their time and their knowledge to me. So I don't want to stop, because it's kind of kept me going, because they were so kind to me, and not in a, they weren't cracking the whip or anything. They were just trying to help me figure it all out. And then so much of it is your own input and your own experience. Mainly what not to do. I'm not doing that again. Didn't work. So this is part of the process, and we'll see that in the Rungius room.
Yeah, let's go through. We're not going to spend too much time in there, but let's go through and look at some of Rungius's.
A couple of trees here. These trees kind of stop the action. See, this moose is looking this way, and our eye naturally comes here and back down here and here. And that's all composition.
Kathy, what do you think about the decision to make the mountains much more white and finished?
Yes, that because it's
contrast.
Like it just, and he put it behind the moose's head for a reason. You wouldn't want to put it here.
You wouldn't want brown behind the brown moose.
Yeah.
Not behind his butt.
That's where the artist comes in as far as moving things around.
Right.
And adding things or leaving things out. You know, he didn't put in all the deadfall. I mean, he sort of indicated it a little bit and then covered it up with foliage.
Yeah.
And then there's this, did you mention the Lake Louise?
We started to look at that. Lake O'Hara.
Lake O'Hara,
yeah.
And then the big one over there, and you can see definite similarities. He did multiple studies of everything. But
The lake study up there on the top right, that's not Lake O'Hara as well as it, because it looks like it's a very rudimentary.
I'm not sure what I've painted up there too, but it's been a long time.
Is that in Canada too?
Yeah, looks like it. That it might be Lake Louise. I'm not totally sure. But. So you can see some of these are pretty loose. I've been to some of these areas in the Wind River. That's Vista, I believe, and how he used the warmth of this tree to give you depth, and everything else is quite cool other than that one little spot there to kind of middle ground, and then the canyon leads our eye up into those sunlit crags of the canyon.
You said that's in the winds somewhere?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. One year Bill Kerr went into the Wind River horseback with Tucker Smith and Clyde Haspelvig. And Bill, I'm sure you took the photos of the studies that he had of the area they were going. And he was so thrilled to walk in Carl's footsteps up there, because where I was telling Jane earlier, there's a little lake up there on Vista, near Vista Pass. And it's got, you'll almost call it a pond. It's not really a big lake or anything, but there's this downfall there in the meadow next to the water. And Tucker told me ahead of time to go look for it, because it's still there. And that I was up there about 15 years ago, I guess, horseback. And because things don't disintegrate, they're under snow all winter. They sort of, it's kind of petrified, I think. But Bill was so excited. I mean, it kind of brought him to tears, so I hear, to walk in Carl's footsteps on his quest.
Do we have any record of the trips Rungus took into the winds that we could relate to our
I thought you were going to say to take, and I was like, I'm going to.
Well, that would be neat.
I would say the expert on locations is Tucker Smith.
Yeah.
And he's done a slideshow here of showing the rungus and then showing his photos of the same. We should ask him to do that again.
Because you know, so often when we're leading tours, it's been a while since I've done one, so you know, this may have changed. But we have people who are here because the tour comes here, not necessarily because they're interested in art.
Right.
But if we can make them relate to a trip they've done to the winds, then all of a sudden this becomes meaningful.
Yeah, or they could take.
Right.
Right, and names of places and locations. Tucker's really good at that.
Tucker, as a young man, his summer job was Forest Service trail clearing in the Wind Rivers. So he's fully aware of almost every crag in the range.
That would be cool, Jane, if he would do that again, if we could just see the slideshow. We would just
It was a great slideshow. You might remember that.
Yeah.
I flew in over the winds coming back at the end of December, and the first time I've ever flown over them, and I had a clear blue day. And
It's astounding.
It makes the Tetons look kind of silly.
it does. I wasn't going to tell anyone that.
And same with the Canadian Rockies, because they go on.
Yeah.
But so the year or soon after Bill Kerr had gone on that trip, I was in an art show given by a friend of the arts at a bank in Billings, and Bill Kerr was the featured speaker, and he gave a slideshow of their trip, and Clyde and Tucker, and I'm not sure who else was up there, the cook and the guide, the outfitter, but he was talking briefly about the trip and what it meant to him, because he never got to meet Carl. By the time Bill got aware of his work, he was passed away. And so in the ensuing, quite by accident, karma I say, Jane Smith and her husband, who was alive at the time, Red Smith, they were very close with the Rungiuses, and they got introduced to Bill. So he was there, because Red had died, the Red Smith Award is named after her husband. She's dead now too, but that was Bill's connection to Rungius personal, because she could tell stories about him. And up there at his talk in the bank, he was in tears at the end, and he just felt so sad that he couldn't ever had a chance to meet Carl. And that's what learning the stories does for you. I've got all kinds of stories of artists that are either alive or across the Great Divide already that I've had contact with that mean the world to me.
Well, it's serendipitous, but I was looking at the Red Smith Award as I came in this morning, and I was looking for where the meeting was. I went to the auditorium first. And I stopped and read it, which, you know, I've been by a zillion times and never read it. And I said, you know, there must be a connection with the Kerrs, but it didn't say that. So now I know.
So and Jane herself told me she loved to hang out with me, and Sue Simpson and her friend Beth, and so we'd go to dinner or lunch or something together, and she told me multiple times about various things about she and the Rungiuses and Red. Carl was pretty private in the studio, but Red Smith was one of the only people he would allow to come in and watch him paint. So that, and Red was an amateur painter.
But the plaque said that he sort of met Rungus in '46, so Rungus must have been relatively old at that time compared to Red, even though Red was, you know, mature because he'd been through World War II.
Right.
You know, was obviously senior in the military.
I think they all went to Alaska together, the Rungiuses and the Smiths. But I can't remember exactly what the story behind that was, but they had a great time. They were very close. And of course, at the time, Rungius' studio in the wintertime was in New York.
Still.
Yeah. And then in the summer, it was in Yale. And there's a great, if you ever get a chance to go to the Glenbow Museum, they don't feature Carl like we have here, but I was on a quest to see his drawings, and everybody was going up there and seeing stacks of unmounted canvases of his studies. And sooner or later, word got out, and then sooner or later they started disappearing from the collection. So you had to make an appointment, and somebody had to sit there from the museum and make sure you didn't put it in your coat pocket. But what I wanted to see was, they were. Wow. And so I wanted to go up expressly to see his drawings, because he drew like a fiend, and a lot of them were animals. And in that case, there were excellent photos in a huge file cabinet, drawer after drawer after drawer, and you could pick those photos up of his drawings, and you wouldn't know the difference, that it wasn't the drawing. You couldn't smudge it, and you couldn't steal it, but it wasn't that people. But that was a learning experience too. So a lot of people don't know that museums are happy to have you make appointments with their curators to see specific things. I went to the Gilcrease once, and Anne Moran was very kind and showed me all kinds of things I didn't even know they had.
Kathy, Banff has, I believe, a fine arts school up there.
Oh, Banff, yeah, I think it
Was Rungus at all associated with that, or was that after?
I don't know about that for sure. I'm going to say it was after, but a lot of famous artists. Sargent painted Lake O'Hara. John Singer Sargent was at Lake O'Hara. Now when that was, I don't know. In fact, there's a little book out that I bought when I was up there about the painters of the Canadian Rockies, and a lot of them were quite well-known painters. So, but when that school started, I don't know.
I don't either. I just knew a student up there, but that was certainly, that was in the 70s.
Yeah.
So different era.
Yeah. Just let people paint on the canvas kind of thing.
Well, let's take a peek at winter painting in the Conservation Gallery, and then maybe you can talk a little bit about winter painting, and let's get out.
Okay, I'll set up my usual one.
But I think he typically spent his winters in his New York studio. But not all artists retreat to their studio for the winter, Kathy being one. This painting by Richard Friese, I know he went to that location, Spitsbergen Island, up in the Arctic Circle, and I'm guessing he probably did some maybe sketches at the very least. I don't know about paintings on location there, but this would have been finished back in his studio. But it's a great example of how an artist can interpret snow and the light and the shadow. And I know you like this one. So if you've watched our Bison Cast episode, we do talk about this painting, and we do go out painting with Kathy outdoors. But we know you have access to that, or you can watch it, but to have her right here is a whole different experience. So, but talk to us about what you like about this painting, because I know you like it.
Yeah, I do love it. So we all know polar bears are white, right? But he's yellow compared to the sunlit snow. And snow is actually somewhat problematic when you're out in it painting, because it's so bright. The pupils of your eye constrict way down into little tiny areas, so that you can see something because it's so bright. So then you kind of filters out color, and so you have to kind of compensate for that. But the really exciting thing about painting snow to me, and John Clymer taught me this, and other people, the brightest white will be directly perpendicular to where the sun is. The sun's hitting that where he stepped in it, and it pushed the snow up. And in here is the deepest shadow. There's a little bit of green right there, believe it or not. And this is reflected light from that bright snow. There's so much reflected light in any kind of light area, sunlit snow especially. And then the rest of it is modulated. You'll see more detail here than over here, because he wants your attention over here. So when you're driving around, you'll see it. The most brightest snow is directly perpendicular to the sun, wherever it has form to it. And flat snow is actually not white at all. It is white, but it's a very much lower value, being bright or dark, than the sunlit snow. So when you're driving around, just be aware of that, and you'll start to see it.
When you're choosing whites to use to depict snow, is there a concept like LRV, light reflective value, in the
Well, there probably is
paints that you choose?
Yeah, in the different kinds of white, you mean? Probably. I just use my old titanium white. It has the most tinning strength. You can get zinc white, and it's a little bit, you might say, a tiny bit warmer in a temperature, but it doesn't have the power to stay really bright. So when you want a range from white out of the tube to sunlit snow that's blue and green, you have to have that tinting strength. And every color has a tinting strength, and every brand has a different tinting strength. Typically, student grade art does not have a real strong tinting strength. You have to use more of it to get what you want. And the professional grades, which are more expensive, because there's cadmium, and there's cobalt, and there's all kinds of ground up pigments in your colors.
So say that again. What does tinting strength mean? What is the definition?
Tinting strength would be how much paint you have to use to get the punch you want. So when you have a low tinning strength, it drives me crazy. Because I can't get enough in there to make it do what I want it to do. But the other thing about tinting strength is, okay, you start with a, quote, blank canvas. I usually tint mine. You'll see my canvas is a little bit tinted, so it's not so bright. And Connie Shoring taught me this. The first piece of paint you put on your panel is correct, and everything else has to relate to that, or you have to change it. Because it's not how it looks on your palette, it's how it looks on your painting.
It's how it relates to what's next to it.
And so, yeah. And so sometimes you don't want much tinting strength. You want that color to be more muted. Like, for instance, in a place that's not real important, anywhere near the edge of a painting. But then you might want, like, he put these highlights on here, which I'm gonna guess is like bird manure. And that's important to this composition. And then this additional bear there is a sort of a side interest, and this kind of is an indication of like where it was. Some people
I think it's like a scientific research station there, and it's some kind of marker or something.
So tinting strength, you want it punchy where you want it punchy, and you want it more quiet or grayed in other places. So the stronger tinting strength you have coming out of the tube, the better chance you have of getting that punch. And then you can gray it.
So when we go out and you see her palette, pay attention to all the colors. Kathy pointed out some green. She uses some green in her snow paintings too, as well as blue, of course, and some of that titanium white, but there's some more bird poop right there. Yeah. So let's break right now, and everybody go get your warm clothes on.
This thing is fairly complicated to get it set up, but once you figure it out, it doesn't take long. It has painting storage here. You can see my blank panel, which I'll rock the canvas over time.
And what's it? Canvas mounted on something?
Yes, on masonry.
Okay.
Yes, like that. And I buy the masonry. We have a table saw. Cut it to size. So we need some glue.
So you glue the linen onto the masonry. That's the first part of the process.
Yep. And
It's hard to get it on there without wrinkles.
yeah, I have all my art books I put on the back of the panel. And the most important tool I have is my phone.
Oh, right.
So what are your colors that you have?
This is French ultramarine blue.
Kathy, do you have a particular palette you like to work with, or does it depend on what you're planning to paint?
I will throw in some different colors for different things. I have a Viridian, I think I have, which I like to use in the winter to get those greens in that reflected light.
And titanium white, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
I never knew the difference between the different whites. I'm sure you did,
I
Rachel.
do. Zinc is more transparent.
Yeah. Yeah, you just don't get the punch. I lay out my palette in the same places. You can see my ochre here, and the yellow goes there, and the red. Because when I'm painting, I don't have the time or want to go, now where did I put it today? I want to be able to just dab
so
right
you know your red is going to be here, and your yellow there, and your blue over there. So you tend to put your warm colors like near each other, and your cool colors near each
kind
other.
of more or less follows the color wheel.
Yep.
And when I teach a class, and I tell everybody, invariably, somebody's going to go, wow, I love that color. What did you use to mix it?
Right.
And I know the name of every color until I get to painting, and then that part leaves me.
Right,
I'm
brain,
like,
left brain.
what is the name of that blue? I use it every day. Ultramarine blue. And it sounds dumb, but
it makes sense to me.
Because
your left side of your brain is language and speech. Right side of the brain is creativity and intuitive, creative stuff.
Yep. So, and I don't carry 10 million brushes with me. These are plenty. And I don't have a lot of big ones. It's for these smaller panels. I will bring a few big ones just to get a lot of paint on in a hurry.
And is it, what's in the
Turpentine.
case? Turpentine. Okay.
Odorless turpentine, I like to use, which is getting
Which is
harder
a
and harder.
thinner,
It's a paint
cleaner,
pen.
brush
Yeah.
cleaner.
And then when I don't always, especially when it's really cold, I'll get most of the paint off, but then when I get home I clean them
Clean
properly.
everything properly.
And the white is, get this stuff out of your way. Garbage bag and white paint. And I always keep my white paint in a plastic bag so if it breaks, it doesn't go all over. Or if I don't get the top feet on all the way.
So why are not the other colors also in plastic
It's there in the
bags?
box. This doesn't fit in there.
Oh, it doesn't fit in
This,
there.
no, it doesn't.
It's a bigger
fit.
tube.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And different times of the year, you know, I'll throw in different yellows for fall, and maybe a different red. Sometimes I use a violet. But this is the basics right
I
there.
love seeing the setup. Since I'm not a painter, I really appreciate seeing how you set up and why.
I use these great Viva towels. They're the most absorbent one, or a shop towel that are blue. And they come in little half squares, so I always pre-fold them. Very important. You're not out here in the 20 below zero having to fold up your paper towels.
There's the surgeon technician in you. Everything's ready.
Yeah. Yep. They get paid. So I typically will use a bit warmer, something fairly light to draw, and so I'm gonna do some. What am I gonna do? That little, people have walked up to see the elk. I'm just gonna kind of put that in there like that. That's the sunlit side of the snow there against that footprint.
What did you say? Right angles to the sun. Yes. Right angles.
Yes. And in animal tracks or people tracks, it's very apparent. And then we've got some sagebrush here. You see I'm just drawing shapes, kind of outlines, and we can put that silver kind of part of his feet. I'm not worried about all the exact thing. That's okay, so that's smaller. Just the general shape of that body. And he's got some antlers. I'm not going to worry about them for this demo. So I have some movement here. Everything's not just flat. Nothing's flat, actually. Every time you do something horizontal, it kind of puts people to sleep. But that's a nice kind of shape there of that trail. And to balance this, I'm going to put a sagebrush down in here. It'll be kind of in the shadow, sort of. So why not just dive in and do something? Get some sort of a sagey color here, and it's very pale. Sage is really a cool green, so I can throw in some of that viridian. This is not dark, and it's not the darkest thing, and it's not the lightest thing. It's in between. And then as these sagebrush come down into the snow, it gets quite a little darker. You see how I'm not worried about every little leaf on the sage. I'm worried about the shadow shapes and the more sunlit shapes. These two are almost the same size, which doesn't work for me, so I'm going to make them just kind of go together. And then we have that elk, and he's just a nice dark rich brown.
You're using a pretty big brush.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I want to get this, especially when you're in a hurry. Like if the sun's changing, like a sunset.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I couldn't have done this as a student, more of a student, but you get handy with the bigger brushes for time saving sake. And brush doesn't have to be perfectly clean. I'm just gonna, and look how stiff that white got already.
Because of the cold.
Yeah. I usually wear those wool pants, and I keep that white paint in the bag right next in my pocket, so that it's as pliable as it can
Keep
be.
the tube warm.
Yeah. Larry made me a painting tent years ago, and I used that too some.
With a heater in it.
Yeah, I can put a heater in it right under my easel. That's really helpful. But if it's windy, that doesn't work so good.
Oh, I love that color. What is in there?
Titanium white and
It's a
ultramarine.
blue. What a great color.
It's kind of a mid-value. It's a little bit teal to me, my eyes. So to gray that up, I can put some. So this is basically shadowed snow. It's not dark shadows, but I can darken it. And then that area behind the sunlit snow on that trail, it's quite dark comparatively. It's all comparisons.
So you said, before you said your first stroke, everything relates to that.
Yeah.
And now I'm trying to remember, what was your first official stroke?
The green and the
It was, well, it was the,
well, the drawing, really.
the orange stuff there. That is way too dark. One of the pretenses of outdoor, any painting is it's easier to lighten up a dark than it is to darken a light. If it's too dark, you don't worry about it because you can change it.
I didn't know that. It's either light or dark. I wouldn't have guessed.
The nice thing about oil is you can go the other way, but it is more work.
Oil painting is really forgiving.
That's what people keep saying. I
You don't know what
I've
you-
experienced that.
You can wipe it out. You know, more watercolor seeps into the paper.
You can't get rid of
It's
it.
done.
You have to
You
just.
blot, and it still remains in the shadow at least.
Obviously, I didn't get enough glue out. Silly.
How often do you have to change your turpentine?
So in the studio, and actually in this can, overnight the sediment from the paint will settle to the bottom.
Yeah.
So I'll take my palette knife and go in there and pull it out. Not so much on this because it's not very much, but I keep a whole jug of used turpentine, and if it just sits there, I can pour off the top and it's perfectly clear. So I don't waste any. But in the studio, I change it. Kind of like whenever my garbage can gets full of paper towels, I change the turpentine.
So great to have sunshine.
Okay,
isn't it?
so-
We haven't had
so
much
nice.
sunshine this winter.
Now what I need is the other thing about this underpainting is I can put a brush stroke down and have something besides, especially in the darker paint, besides white canvas knobs sort of annoying me, especially in the dark
Peak,
passages.
the white, peaking very white canvas.
That at least it's a color. And I'm going to show you just how I would lay in some sunlit snow now.
I love how you roll your brush.
That green one came from right there. Those kind of things can be annoying or they can be add to the interest. That gob of paint there. It took me a long time to lighten up and just let the paint be paint instead of being so worried about every little gob.
Ooh, that's pretty.
So you have to have, especially when the paint's kind of cold, you have to have a gob of paint on there to put over that blue to get it to kind of stay. Sometimes you want it to meld, kind of be soft-edged. Now if you stand back, you kind of get the idea of how, how you get to make form you have to kind of plan ahead. And that's where your experience comes in. Just do a quick wash. The sky is really intense. And if I put just pure white and blue in there, not quite covering it, it's just a little too blue. But
Thinking a lot of people visiting this area, I can't believe how blue the sky is here. There's no humidity in the air and no pollutants. It's so blue.
we can see, when we look way up here, it's quite dark blue, and when we look down toward the horizon, look how light it is. And they always taught me in 3D, you need to compress that. You're not painting fur up there, but you can use that fact to give the illusion of space in the sky, I guess I would say. So all these brushstrokes are kind of rough, but I can always smooth them out later. And you can even take your paper towel and do fun stuff like that. So I've kind of compressed.
Oh, you did that fast.
The darkness to that to that. Now I need to find the light part of that sagebrush up there.
Where the sun is hitting it?
Yes.
Where that beautiful frost is.
And it's there again, when I look at it, I want to compare how bright, how warm, how cool it is compared to the shadow parts of these sagebrush.
It's hard for me. The value stuff is always hard for me.
Yeah. A lot of it's so subtle.
Squinting helps.
Yeah, it's squinting really hard.
All rain.
And then what I'm doing here too, I'm pulling some of that green that's not set up yet into this sunlit stuff. It's not perfect, but it's close. If it's really bad, I'll take the time and wipe it out. If it's close, I can modify it later, change it.
Now, would you, if you feel like you want to capture something, do you ever take photographs of it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They're kind of invaluable. Every artist has used photos since cameras were invented.
Yeah.
And they might have been black and white, but yeah, I find myself using them less and less all the time. I don't know for sure why. And we all have way too many photographs, right? But
I like what you said before about if you just paint from a photograph, it doesn't. And Carl Rungus said the same thing. It doesn't. You can't capture the. What did he call it? The zing, or he had a word for it.
The life in it. You know,
we talked about the silveriness
the
too.
cool silvery
cool
tones.
silver tone. I love that.
The you know, when you're sort of uninitiated, at least for me, photorealism was like the coolest thing. Oh, I want to paint like that. And the more you paint, the more you go, well, that's so boring. I mean, I tell my students, and they don't get it.
They said, I want to paint like that.
If we're going to copy the photograph, let's just copy the photograph and then sit down and have some wine. instead of trying to interpret how to get life into this painting. And I don't dislike photorealism. It's just not what I want to paint.
Right. But
So,
and you edit. I mean, I can see by now you've left out that short sagebrush that's right in front of the elk there.
yes. And
That's
that, you
not
know,
part
he
of
looks like a
your
three-legged elk
composition.
to me, because I can't see that leg, and that's never smart. Never three-legged. So there's another reason for knowing anatomy. There's a lot of photographs. In fact, I have a lot of photographs of cowboys doing stuff, and when you look at the photograph, the legs look all wrong, even though they were attached to a real horse, but they don't look right because they're in an awkward position. So that's when your anatomy knowledge comes in, and the fact that you know how that leg works. The hind legs are really complicated in any four-legged mammal. They have the hip, and then they have the hock, and then they have the foot. Then they all go
sort of a different angle. So having the knowledge of the anatomy and well, hell, Michelangelo it was illegal, but he'd sneak into the morgues and dissect bodies, human bodies, so he understood the musculature. And Carl Rungius did that with his skills when he was hunting.
Okay, I'm gonna duck in and start setting up the food.
Okay.
But you don't need to
another-
rush in it. Yeah, yeah, you can take another 5-10 minutes, whatever you want. And this is your drink, Kathy, right here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I guess I could do something with that elk and see if I can't give you the impression of what it is, since it doesn't look like anything. Wish me luck. Sometimes, you know, I can't tell you the amount of times I've had animals come up to me when I'm not painting by myself, being quiet. I've had badgers come here. I've had moose walk by me. I got in the middle of a herd of buffalo one time. I didn't hear them coming even. In an aspen grove, and so where was I going with that? It's kind of cool to actually be here instead of in your nice warm studio, because being out here gives you the idea for paintings. Like that condor painting I had in the show last year.
Oh yeah.
They silently came by me. I mean, I was just in the right place at the right time for them to fly by me. I've seen them before walking around, but they're not very pretty. Walking around, that's not very exciting. So that one came right by me, and I couldn't not paint. And I happened to have my camera on, click, 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 you know, rapid exposure. So that was fortuitous. They weren't real in focus particularly, and I didn't get a lot of head detail, but then you can get on the computer and look at internet photos of their head. But I would have never had that painting in my brain to do unless I had seen it.
Yeah.
And that's the amazing thing of where we live. This wildlife is so accessible.
Have you had any bears come up and look at your paintings?
No, I haven't. I have a friend that happened to him a couple of years ago, 5 or 6 years ago here.
Some of them are pretty curious, the ones that I've worked with out in the park.
Yeah.
Very curious.
They are. And when you're not in a group, everybody cackling, they're much more apt to come check you out. And domestic animals too. So
the big fluffy cows is we'll pet the big fluffy cows.
And so the angle of that head is really weird from here. I'm going to try and pull that head out of the rest of that body. You see the sunlit side of his jaw? I just picked the shape of it. And instead of scrubbing it, which would have made it look darker, I had to have it stay lighter so where it would come forward. And he's got an ear out there. And, you know, the antlers, I'm not going to belabor that, but his neck is also sunlit, as his brisket is right there. Brisket. Yeah. Remember it. And so then the legs are all screwy, so I can cut back into this with some thicker paint and redraw this where this belly is and that far hind leg, which is at an angle. And then I have to clean my brush of that brown paint that got on it. And his brisket is right here, and there's that. So now I'm starting to draw the legs by not drawing the legs.
I see.
Drawing the legs by not drawing the legs.
Yes.
I like that.
That's a good.
My one mentor, he said I was hosting this horse paint workshop, and he said to a student, and I could hear him. He says, "Don't draw the legs. Draw what's between the legs, because it's so descriptive." When you look up there at those hind legs, the hawk on the left is straight up and down. But the angle of the hawk on the right is angular, and those bigger hip, upper leg muscles are thicker, and then it narrows right down where that hawk starts. So, and then there's the front leg there, and then I need to go.
Hey, you guys on your way then? Yeah, you just come down the stairs.
It's kind of like wildlife, you know, they all got to stop. So I'm not going to belabor that, but that's how it works, and it's very rough, but sometimes something will happen, the wind comes up, or I have a time frame and I have to stop here, and I'll just take it home like that. It stays dry for several days. If I want to scrape it off, I can always scrape it off.
Several days, okay.
Yeah, and so it's, you know, that's algorithm very good. If I was going to really do it, I'd have to get my little brush out and do all this stuff. Yeah, and antlers are really complicated, so that takes some study and some whatnot. Anyway, one more thing I gotta do just for me. That angle of that hip on the far left side there is all wrong. There, that's better. It's not great, but it's good. And his back tips down toward his shoulder. So that corrected that fairly good. And the key to all that is getting enough paint on your brush and putting it down and not scrubbing it. When you scrub it, it does that, and then you got nothing. Sometimes you want to scrub it. So it's actually a pretty nice day. Cool.
Beautiful.
You're welcome.
It's magical.
You know, people, it's such a mystery to people that don't paint as to how they appear. And that's why quick draws have become so important.
Are your hands not freezing right now?
They're kind of cold. I've got warm gloves in here. And I do paint. You can see the paint on my gloves.
Oh,
I do
okay.
paint with these on some. Today's not too bad, and I knew I wasn't going to be out here for an hour. That works for me. So, go in and warm up, and I'll be in shortly.
What's the hardest animal for you to paint?
Oh, horses.
Horses?
Yeah. You know, yeah, even though I know horses really well, they're very complicated, especially in motion, as any animal would be. But all the ungulates are similar, with, you know, hocks and big knees and a brisket and neck inserting. So once you paint enough of one of them, you kind of have a good idea of what the others look like. Now, elephant, I wouldn't have a clue. But if I was near a zoo, I'd probably go to the zoo and paint elephants, you know, from life. The painting from life thing is just, once you get the hang of it, it's so intriguing. And I end up with things in my paintings that I would have never thought of if I'd have been slaving away from the photo in the studio.
Have something else to paint.